Okay, let's go.
Yeah,
Good
let's start.
afternoon. I'm Amaya Artels from Polygon Education. First of all, thank you all for joining us and spending this time with us. Welcome to the second session, Basic Operations with Singapore Maths. The chat is open, so if you have any question or doubt, don't hesitate and ask. Good afternoon, Parvana. Thank
Good
you.
afternoon.
She's with us. She's gonna lead the session. So please, if you want, introduce yourself, and whenever you want, you can start.
All right. Thank you, Amaya. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining. If we are even less people here, I'm not worried at all. I know there will be people watching this webinar later, and welcome, everybody. I'm Parvana, originally from Azerbaijan, but I am a world citizen because I thought around the world. And before Portugal, I was in Malaysia, Singapore, and all of those countries. Now I'm in Portugal, been 14 years of international educator, and I am mathematics curriculum coordinator, and then I am a PYP 5 grade 5 homeroom teacher. That's me. Welcome, everybody. And please, if you have any questions about anything that we are presenting, drop your messages, drop your questions, drop your comments in our chat box. So, Amaya, may I start?
Yes, when you want.
Okay,
Whenever you
beautiful.
want.
And if you allow me to share my screen, I prepared lots of things for you, everyone. So give me a second, please. I'm sorry for my desktop. It's a teacher desktop. And I will start. Perfect. So as we said in our previous, let me start from the beginning. Okay. So this is our second session about basic operations, and I'm sharing our agenda about it, and we will again talk about the nature of Singapore mathematics, that those who missed it, and we will talk about the numbers, we will talk about the multiplication stories, we will talk about how we use multiplication and division to solve word problems, and then how we use stories to introduce the concept of mathematics, how we use the stories to introduce the concept of division or multiplication in our third session, and we will find lots of connection between all those operations. Moving forward, as all may you know that primary education is the stage where acquire basic mathematics skill in order to develop logical reasoning, problem solving, and not only in mathematics, always in all other disciplines, because I'm glad that we are implementing Singapore mathematics in our school, that we started actually integrating Singapore mathematics in other disciplines as well. So in if you're talking about social studies or sciences, we always integrate it. That's why we say in all disciplines. So primary mathematics aims enable students to acquire mathematical concepts and skills for their everyday life. So I can give an example. Students should understand that mathematics is everywhere. It's not just a class and happening inside the school or inside in our classroom, and we finish the journal, then we are gone with mathematics, or we are done with mathematics. No, mathematical concepts are everywhere, and skills are for everyday use. Or we also aim to develop thinking skills, reasoning, communication, application. Of course, all of those skills, including metacognitive skills, through mathematical approach, what we do is solve word problems. And we build confidence and foster in mathematics. And when you start implementing Singapore mathematics, you will use various of methods, teaching methods, and you will use lots of strategies in mathematics by using manipulatives and all of those. Sorry. Okay, so I wrote it here, nature of mathematics, that I really loved sharing with you. Mathematics can be described as a study of properties, relationships, operations, algorithm, and application of numbers and space at very basic levels. And of course, we can use abstract objects, we can use concepts at more advanced levels. But of course, when we introduce any maths concept, we always use manipulatives that I'm going to share in my presentation about it. So another mathematical objects are what I mentioned here, properties and relationships. And we are talking about presentation and communication. And we don't want students to understand that mathematics is just doing something else on the paper. Not at all. No, we don't say that. Mathematics is not the thing that we did on the paper on journal. No. And do you do math talks in the classroom? Do you have any storytelling times during math classes? Or you just do the drilling activities all the time that make students feel stressed, and we cause math anxiety in our students, sorry. Okay, so today we will reflect on what are the properties of mathematical concepts and how they are related. Since we are focusing on division and multiplication, we will find out how they are connected. And also, how can mathematical objects and concepts be presented and communicated within and beyond the discipline? What does it mean is, do you only teach math in math class, or do you have integrated classes, or do you connect math classes in other disciplines too? So what meaningful actions we can perform on the mathematical objects? So how we carry out them? So for example, I'm giving an example because this question may not be clear. If you are teaching data handling, do you do surveys? And students implement their other knowledge, discipline knowledge in mathematics. They create survey, and then they actually read the information, and they actually search the data, and they present the data through data handling. And then how can the mathematical objects be further abstracted, and where can we apply this knowledge? So this is all about creating a learning space for all students, and they implement. First of all, we unblock students' mathematical knowledge, and then we allow them to understand, and we allow them to use manipulatives, and we use different strategies to make them understand mathematical concepts. Of course, the next step is application time. So do they have enough learning space to apply their knowledge? And learning space, I don't mean a physical space, but what I meant is in other disciplines. So how we are allowing students to apply their mathematical concept in other disciplines. Okay, the big idea. We are always talking about, when we are talking about mathematics, we are always talking about big ideas that are central to mathematics. They appear in different topics and strands. So there is a continuation of the ideas across the level. What is important about maths, Singapore mathematics? When you are building up your curriculum in Singapore mathematics, you think about as a block, and each strand will be taught in each grade. Students will have the continuation across the levels, but each grade level, you present the big idea and the advanced version of the big idea. For example, in grade 1, you present what? Multiplication and multiplication. And then, of course, in grade 2, you also present multiplication. In grade 4, you also present multiplication. In grade 5, you also present multiplication. But what about the levels? Are those presentation levels the same? No, of course. When you present all those concepts in each grade level, it changed. The level of multiplication will change. So that's why we are saying a spiral curriculum, or it says continuation in the curriculum. This is what makes Singapore mathematics special. And of course, when we are talking about interrelated components, so which are very, very important in very crucial in Singapore mathematics, we focus on concept, skills, process, metacognition, and attitude. And all those 5 interrelated components help students unblock their mathematics skills. And then, of course, it will be mathematical problem solving oriented classes. So do you use any tasks to start your class, or how do you start your class? And if please do share your ideas and opinions in our chat box. So how do you start your math classes? How do you present your concepts? How do you allow your students to use their skills to understand the math concept? What are the process, and how this process helps students' thinking skill improve? And then are you promoting growth mindset in your classroom? Are you unblocking students' math knowledge and understanding? Okay. So well, when we are talking about concept, skills, process, and metacognition and attitude, and each one of them that I don't want to repeat myself, I mentioned, so this is all about the presentation of the concept. It's all about the confidence, how we promote this knowledge in the classroom, how we motivate students to be present in the classroom. They are present in the classroom, but are they genuinely present in the classroom? Are we helping them to be aware of their own knowledge? How are we helping them to unblock their math skills and proficiency in mathematics? So it's all about, again, Singapore Maths and their implementation. In my previous presentation that I mentioned, we can present any concept in 3 different ways, which is we can present with abstract, we can present through concrete way, which we will use manipulatives. Then we can use pictures. We can ask students to create their own resources. So it's the pictorial part of the approach. And then once we notice that, once we realize students are fully ready, and I can proceed with the concrete, abstract part, which can be your worksheet, which can be your drilling activity, which can be your any online digital resources that you are using in your math class. Of course, the power of mathematics, exploring and understanding knowledge, constructing meaning, transferring meaning, and applying with understanding. So this is the power of mathematics. And you can truly say that, yes. So my students feel the power of mathematics through exploring understanding and knowledge, through constructing meaning, through transferring meaning, and through applying. Of course, the final point is applying with understanding. And of course, you need to keep that in your mind. We can go back and forth when we are doing all these strategies in the math class. Okay, so I will also talk about the key features of Singapore mathematics, which is very, very important to know. And again, I always mention it over and over again. So what makes this mathematics, what makes this approach very, very special, which is concrete, pictorial, and abstract approach. Again, you introduce your concept in mathematics, you start with the concrete part, you use manipulatives, and you promote the idea of using manipulatives in the classroom. And then you continue with pictorial part. And of course, you continue with the abstract when you see that students are really mastering the concept in the concrete stage and the pictorial stage. And next one is, if you look at the picture, you will see, guys, I'm talking about the number bonds, which are another important one of the strategies we use in maths. Students learn to show whole part relationship between numbers, and that's very important to introduce from young age when students start learning about numbers, and when you are promoting the concept of number sense in your classroom. So that's very crucial to start with whole part relationship between numbers. And then next bullet point is bar modeling. When we introduce bar model, we introduce bar model when students are grade 2, and then grade 2, and then grade 2, it's time to introduce bar model. And basically, when you introduce word problems and you use bar models, and again, you ask students to visualize their understanding, which is very important. And of course, another important part is mental math, and this is very crucial for students, thinking flexibility. And then, of course, they develop the number sense, and then they had the clear understanding of numbers. Okay, so we have done actually addition and subtraction. We will move on with multiplication. Is there any question coming up? Do you have any question related to? We can do a minute Q&A session if you have any question. Please go ahead if you have any question. Anaya, is there any question in our chat box? May I continue? Okay, no more questions, no questions in our chat box, so I will continue. So as I mentioned, we introduced multiplication in grade 1, and then you allow students to explore multiplication in grade 1. But how do we actually allow our students? How do we create a learning space for students to explore multiplication? Okay, I'll continue. So this is how we start in grade 1 class to explore multiplication. So we ask them to group. You can use any shapes and you can ask them to group. Up to you. You know your classroom level very well, you know your students very well, and you know your students' interests very well. So we actually explain the concept of grouping. What does it mean? Do they understand what does grouping mean? And so here, keyword for when we introduce multiplication as a concept in PYP or grade 1, we call it PYP 1 in our school. So grade 1, I'll use grade 1 because that is easier, so everybody will understand what I mean. So do you introduce what does grouping mean? Do they really understand what grouping mean? So first thing is ask them to group. I use the hearts to group the group hearts. So you give them hearts and or any shapes that you want, and you ask them how many groups. It's up to you. And then each group again has 3 hearts, and ask them to show it with numbers. So you can start again, we can use here CPA model. We can use concrete, we can use pictorial part. Of course, we can at the end, when you feel your students are mastering their level, we can use the abstract part, which is 3 plus 3 plus 3. We have 3 groups of hearts, and each group we have 3 hearts. So are your students able to explain this one with their own words? So here, the keyword will be grouping when we introduce multiplication in grade 1. My question is, you may ask this question, may I use, or is it how it's relevant to use the word grouping when you are introducing multiplication in grade 2? I would say you have already introduced the word vocabulary group that will help them understand maths concept. So I would actually make sure that I am using the relevant vocabulary in grade 2, because in grade 3 or in grade 4. So that's very important in terms of vocabulary wise. And then 3 groups of 3 is 9, and which is the idea. 3 groups of 3, students should explain it that way. So there are 9 hearts altogether. So if you look at here, it's very important to know to use this vocabulary so students really truly understand what do you mean by saying altogether or groups. Okay, now let's try the other one. So again, you can use, I put it here many examples that will allow you to use those examples in your classrooms too. Okay, so again, you can use in that way. So in order to explain the vocabulary wise or number wise, allowing students to understand the numbers and using the numbers in their vocabulary or using a proper language in mathematics classes. So there are how many groups, and then each group has how many crayons. Actually, what could do here is we can really create a story and we can introduce maths concept like multiplication with the stories. So there are, of course, students will see it. You are helping them to see visually all of those materials and everything. You say there are groups of what, and then each group has how many crayons. So, and this can be very, very helpful to use on your board. So if you're doing whole group session, which is the idea and the ideal part of introducing math concept, so you do a whole group introduction. When you do a whole group class, this is the first step. So you are trying to understand what your students know and where to go and which students need help. And after whole group introduction, you can make your regrouping, and then you work with the students who really need your help more. Okay, and then same situation here. There are 3 groups, and each group has 3 crayons, and then together we have 3 twos will be 6. So students understand 3 twos will be 6, and then we have 3 groups of 2, and then there are 6 crayons altogether here. And one thing is very important to understand. You show variety of ways to your students. You allow them to understand, not with one way, with many ways. Okay, and then another examples. So we make stories. That's very, very important. So you tell the story and students actually display the story, or students draw the story after the story. So there are 4 hens and each hen has 3 eggs. So you ask them to group the hens, and you ask them to actually not divide, but group the eggs according to the hens that you mentioned in your story. So you also say all those, okay, 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus, so all together we have 12 eggs. So you actually tell this story, full story. You ask your students to create the picture part, pictorial part, or you can use anything, any manipulatives that you think will work with your students, and you will use the manipulatives to introduce your story. So you allow them to see many other ways. So 4 groups of 3 will be 12, or 4 times 3 will be 12, or in our 3 twos will be 6. You can use the same stories, the same strategies in that. So altogether we have 12 eggs. So we always make multiplication stories. And of course, what are some strategies we have to consider when you are doing stories? So we use multiplication sentences. So how we use 4 times 3 equals 12. So students should have a clear understanding of numbers so they can visualize the number. 4 times 3 equals 12. So you make multiplication sentences, which is very, very important. So you show, of course, the first thing in your class, the whole group, and you model it. And that's very important. When we had our Singapore Maths workshops, it was entire year we have done with Polygon Education, one of our wonderful maths trainer. She mentioned over and over again, when you do a whole class activity or whole class introduction, always model first. So we cannot ask students to do something else that we are not sure if they know or not. So we first model what we know, or what our students know, what our students know. So after you modeling, students will follow you. So 4 times 3 equals 12. So you mentioned there that times stands for multiplication. It means putting equal groups together. So you make sure that students understand. And this process is happening in grade 1. Okay, so another stories about you create a story and you help them. I added here many examples that will help you. And then you prepare a word problem. And just, I can tell you that just using those pictures will allow them to create their own word problem and to solve this problem. Of course, again, this is one option. And then you ask them, when you ask your students to create any word problems by using pictures, they will have their own version. They will have their own version. Of course, we encourage them to create their word problems, and they will use these pictures that whatever you offer them, and they will create it. They will create their own word problems. So these are very different variety of word problems that you can use in the classroom. If you wish, please, I can share my email. I can send all those materials with you. Again, division. Now we are done with multiplication. This is how we introduce multiplication in our grade 1 when we start introducing the concept of mathematics. Now, introducing the concept of division. So, of course, again, we start with whole group and we start modeling in our classroom, but we ensure that students are following you, and then share equally. And when we were visiting classrooms and our teachers, our colleagues were using amazing daily objects and to introduce division. And they, of course, they did it through stories. They did it through, for example, they used fruits, they used vegetables, they used books, pencils, and anything to share, to understand sharing equally, like sharing. Because these words will help them to understand what division is. When we divide, when we share, what happens when we share things? What happens when we share numbers? And you can also start your division with the stories. And of course, this is what we've done in the classroom with our students. And then, of course, we picked volunteers in the classroom and we brought lots of pencils. And then we asked them to share equally between their colleagues. So that was really helpful to understand when they share what happens. So what happens in each group. So of course, they use the vocabulary they've already learned when they are learning multiplication. So they will come up with the idea of oh, multiplication and division are super connected. They are super related. So I am using those vocabularies that I learned when I was learning the big idea of multiplication. Again, so that was absolutely the idea. Then after that, when you share those objects, here in that case, it was balloons. So you start the conversation. Why? What happened? Until you get the idea of students understood the big idea of the division. They understand share equally. And then these are another examples that you can use in your classrooms. Of course, you prepare this and you ask them to talk about it or fill in this. And again, I would also do when I'm introducing any concept in the classroom, I would do a whole group activity. So again, in division, when we are introducing division, we always use the idea of sharing equally, and always we use CPA model. And it is very important to understand the understand how helpful to use CPA model when you're introducing multiplication or division. These are another examples that you can use so they understand sharing equally amongst the groups. This is happening in grade 1, but when we are and division, so now we move a little bit advanced version of the concept, and we used a little bit of complex version of it. So we have again, visual part is important for students to see and to understand. And then you have different word problems or stories to let students understand the difference between multiplication and division, and find the connection, make connection between multiplication and division. So I use those examples. Of course, if you have another examples, and you can use it. Since students has got the idea of what multiplication is in grade 1, so you move, it is another block of the curriculum. It's another block of the Singapore Maths. So when you are designing your curriculum, you always think about this. It's a spiral. Now, that is the second loop of our spiral. And you pay attention here, multiplication is the repeated addition of the number. So here students should understand, multiplication is a repeated addition. Yes, so now they need to connect multiplication to addition. And then I gave the example from here. Of course, you can have different examples, allowing students to see why we say multiplication is the repeated addition in that case. And we show, of course, different version of it. We offer different variety of activities, allowing students to see the big idea in different versions. This is another way of explaining a multiplication. It's a repeated addition and can be written 3 times 6 or other way around. So it can be shown in that way too. I'm controlling our time just to see how much time we've left. I want to also talk about division in grade 2. Because these are really important to understand. Those are important grades that when we introduced all basic operations. So filling the missing number, again, letting students to understand, providing all those visual pictorial part of the math, so allowing students to understand the big idea through the pictures. Of course, you can ask them to create their own resources, always works. And they're always enthusiastic to do it. Any questions so far in our chat box? I want to see if we have any questions. So no questions. So I would like to continue with the division. Okay. So as I also mentioned, the importance of 4 operations in lower grades, like grade 1 and 2, these are the grades we always introduce multiplication and division. So we need to make sure that students truly understood the big idea of division, the big idea of multiplication, and how they are connected. So division is the splitting of a set of items equally into groups. So if you remember, in grade 1, when we introduced division, we said equally share. And then here, instead of sharing, we use another word, which is splitting of a set of items equally. So this is part of division when we are introducing division. Okay. And we use the division is the splitting, the vocabulary splitting. Students will understand the word, of course. You can again go back to your, you can brush up students' mind a little bit about it, and you can brush up and you can say, division, we learned about. Which vocabulary we learned about in division? So they may say, we learned about equally share. Yes, what else? They will tell you. I'm sure they will tell you. And splitting set of items. So you give them a random item and you ask them split of a set of items in equally into groups. Sorry. And students will do it. Definitely will do it. I would do it in groups, and allowing students to discuss, to talk about it, and asking students in what ways they can do it. They can do it in many ways. So why and how, you always ask them. You always encourage them and invite them to be an inquirer student. Lots of examples I added here for you guys. You can take it if you want those resources. Please do let me know. Of course, when at the end of grade 2, once you are done with the concept of division and multiplication, so you start exploring the relationship between multiplication and division, how they are connected. While doing multiplication, do I need division? Or while doing division, while analyzing division or exploring division, do I need multiplication? So are they related? They will definitely say yes. And of course, you will encourage them to say how, in what ways they are. So they can tell you, we always check the answer with division, or other way around. If they divide, they say we use multiplication, check the answer, or we use division, check the answer. So they may say that all these answers, or they may not say that all the answers. Okay, another examples that I gave it to you, and to group and or split or share equally, or you use. And as a teacher, we need to understand the importance of using vocabulary in math class. And we need to make sure, as I mentioned before again, we say, okay, model the class. So if we model the class, we need to ensure that we are using the proper vocabulary to explain, to allow students to explore multiplication and division. And then when you model it, students will definitely follow you. So these are other examples. Again, if you give this one, students will understand, what is the connection? Yes, that is the connection. And I divided, I also checked my answer with multiplication, or other way around. So you can ask them to do this, and you can give them many other options to do it. Personally, I try to avoid some paperwork, and which is very, very like printing out worksheet and giving it. I avoid it because that may cause some stress among students. So I try to avoid using that kind of the kind of drilling activities. Instead, I can use that kind of activities. They will also, as we mentioned, multiplication is repeated addition. So make sure that your resources are super holistic, that allows students to understand all those resources, all those activities. So when you are doing multiplication table at the end of grade 2, and of course you start with 2s, you continue with 5s, you explain it with many ways, and I would say one of the ways you can explain it, skip counting. So we used always number lines to explain it, and we always used ask students to use number lines, skip 2 or 4 or 3, all the numbers. Like we, I think, made a long number line in our hallway that everybody could use. Okay, these are the examples that I gave it to you. There are many ways to introduce all the timetables. And when we say it's just an example, 6 times 2, 12. Why? And you allow students to dive into it, explore it, and to explain it until you make sure that students got the idea. We have got only 1 minute left. I will stop the presentation because I'll continue in our third session, which is happening in May. I like to see everybody here again just to continue our webinar. Do you have any questions? Please do let me know. I can also share all resources with you. And very last point I want to mention, so when we are grade 3, primary 3 mathematics, we start mental math. When we start mental math, we ensure that all students are really well aware of the concept of math and division and multiplication. Of course, there will have always, it's a learning curve. And it's a learning curve. We always learn, students always learn. We won't have always a perfect class. There's no such thing. And I wish you guys, thank you for your participation, and I wish you a great day. Thank you so much. That is the end of our webinar for today. Have a beautiful evening.